The house groaned under the weight of its own silence, a tired beast settling into the dusk. Lydia Harper stood in the second-story bedroom, her fingers tracing the spines of books she hadn't read in years, their pages yellowed like old bones. The single bulb overhead flickered, casting jagged shadows across the peeling wallpaper. She didn't look up, didn't want to see her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. At exactly 9 p.m., a low whine sliced through the stillness, sharp and mournful like a violin string snapping. She froze, her breath catching. At the window, clouded with years of grime, a German shepherd stared up from the frostbitten yard below. His eyes glinted twin moons in a face carved by hunger and time, unblinking, as if he could see through the walls to something or someone long gone. The air thickened heavy with a question neither could answer yet. The house crouched at the edge of town, its clapboard sides peeling like skin after a burn, surrounded by pines that whispered secrets in the wind. Frost clung to the ground, a brittle shroud, and the second-story window stared blankly at the world, its glass streaked with years of neglect. Lydia's boots scuffed the warped floorboards as she approached the window, her breath fogging the pane. Faint scratches marred the wooden frame, thin and desperate, as if claws had scrabbled there trying to get in or out. Below, the German shepherd stood rigid, his fur matted with mud, his gaze locked on the window like a sentinel guarding a grave. The yard was empty, yet the pines seemed to lean closer, their shadows pooling like spilled ink. Somewhere beyond a single street lamp buzzed its light too weak to reach the house's secrets. Lydia pressed her palm against the cold glass, her fingers splaying like roots searching for soil that wasn't there. Inside her chest, a hollow ache pulsed steady as a metronome reminding her of the nights she'd spent alone after the divorce papers arrived, crisp and final as a death certificate. She hadn't cried then, hadn't let the grief over the child she'd lost, barely a whisper of life, crack her open. Instead, she'd packed her life into boxes, fleeing to this forgotten town where no one knew her name. But now, with the dog's eyes boring into her from below, something stirred unbidden and unwelcome. Why does it look at me like that, like it knows? Her breath came shallow, her shoulders hunching as if to ward off the weight of unspoken regrets. She turned away from the window, pacing the room, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the emptiness. The books on the shelf blurred their titles, mocking her attempts at normalcy. Just a stray, she told herself, but the lie tasted bitter, stirring memories of her husband's final words. "You're too closed off, Lydia, even for a ghost." She sank onto the bed, hands trembling as she clutched the quilt, its threads fraying like her composure. The dog's stare lingered in her mind, a mirror to her own isolation, pulling at threads she thought she'd buried deep. Numbness had been her armor, but tonight it felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter under the pressure of those unblinking eyes. She whispered to the empty room, "What do you want from me?" But the silence only deepened her voice, swallowed by the house's indifferent walls. Lydia's gaze drifted beyond the dog, catching a flicker of movement across the street. Mr. Pruitt stood on his porch, his silhouette etched against the dim glow of a cigarette ember, watching the scene with eyes narrowed like slits in a fortress wall. He didn't move, didn't wave, just observed, as if the dog's vigil was a ritual he knew too well. Ghost shifted below his ears, twitching toward some unheard sound, his body tensing like a bowstring drawn tight. A soft creak echoed from the attic above Lydia, faint but insistent, like a door sighing open on rusted hinges. She shivered, the air suddenly thicker, laced with the scent of dust and forgotten things. The dog's head tilted slightly, his eyes meeting hers one last time before he melted into the shadows, leaving only the promise of return and the unsettling certainty that whatever secret he guarded, it was about to pull her in. Years ago, Lydia Harper had been a woman of light and laughter, her classroom a haven where children's voices rose like birds in spring. She remembered the warmth of her husband's hand in hers, David, with his easy smile, and promises of forever, their home filled with the scent of fresh bread and dreams of a family. But then came the night of the ultrasound, the doctor's voice a blade, no heartbeat, just an empty echo where life should have bloomed. The grief swallowed her whole, turning their marriage into a battlefield of unspoken accusations, his eyes pleading for her to return from the abyss, hers hollow, staring at walls that closed in tighter each day. "I can't do this alone," he'd whispered the night he left his suitcase a shadow in the doorway, leaving her with echoes of what could have been. She wandered then from city to small town, teaching by rote, her lessons mechanical as a clock winding down. Lydia's days unfolded like pages in a forgotten book, each one crisp and identical, a ritual to keep the chaos at bay. Mornings began with coffee black as tar, sipped alone at the kitchen table, where sunlight slanted through dust motes, illuminating nothing but her solitude. She graded papers with mechanical precision, red pens slashing through errors like barriers against her own vulnerabilities, avoiding the eyes of her students who whispered about the sad teacher who never smiled. Afternoons blurred into errands, groceries stacked neatly in cabinets, books alphabetized on shelves, everything in its place to fend off the disarray of her thoughts. Evenings were the hardest. She'd draw the curtains early, but not before glancing at the yard, half hoping, half dreading the dog's return. It's just a habit, she'd think, her internal voice flat as pressed linen, a defense against the pull of curiosity that threatened her numbness. She avoided mirrors, fearing the emptiness in her gaze, and turned to crosswords instead, filling squares with words that meant nothing just to occupy the void. Ghost's fur hung in ragged patches, like forgotten flags tattered by storms. No one remembered his ribs pressing against skin like bars in a cage long abandoned. He had once been called Shadow, a name whispered with affection by Clara, the woman whose laughter filled the second-story room like sunlight through lace curtains. She was young, vibrant, her hands gentle as they stroked his ears, her voice a melody that coaxed him from the shadows of his puppyhood fears. But love had twisted into something darker, a man jealous and volatile, whose fists fell like thunder not just on Clara, but on Ghost when he dared to growl in defense. The night it ended, Ghost's world shattered, shouts echoing through the house. Clara's cry cut short her body, vanishing into silence, as the man Pruitt's shadow in the memory dragged her away. Ghost had lunged, teeth bared, but a boot to his side sent him crumpling, ribs cracking like dry branches. Left behind, betrayed by the one who should have protected, he wandered the streets, survival a raw instinct etched into his bones. In the dim glow of the street lamp, Lydia and Ghost existed as reflections in a fractured mirror, their emptiness echoing across the frost-veiled yard. She paced the second-story room, her footsteps a muted rhythm against the floorboards, while he circled the base of the house paws, tracing invisible paths worn by repetition. Both carried the weight of absence, Lydia's from a life unraveled by loss. Ghost's from a bond severed by violence, their gazes meeting through the glass like threads connecting parallel voids. She avoided her own shadow on the wall, elongated and lonely, much as he shied from his reflection in puddles distorted and unrecognizable. Internal whispers plagued them. Why bother, Lydia thought, stacking books as barriers against feeling, while Ghost's instincts urged retreat, his body low, ears alert for betrayal's footfall. The sky split open that night, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that hammered the roof like accusations. Lydia huddled by the window, her breath fogging the glass, the clock ticking toward 9 p.m., as if marking a sentence. Outside, the yard transformed into a churning sea of mud and ice, the pines whipping wildly, their branches clawing at the air. Then he appeared, Ghost materializing from the shadows, his fur plastered flat against his gaunt frame, water streaming from his muzzle like tears. He stood there unyielding, staring up at the second-story window, but his body trembled, legs buckling slightly under the assault of the storm. A gust howled, slamming rain against the house, and Ghost flinched, his ears pinned back, eyes wide with a vulnerability that pierced the night. Lydia's heart lurched. The sight of him so stoic yet crumbling was a visceral punch, his ribs heaving, breath pluming in ragged bursts, the cold seeping into his bones like poison. She grabbed her flashlight, its beam cutting through the downpour like a hesitant blade, illuminating his shivering form, the scars on his hide glistening, wet and raw. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the foundations, and Ghost lowered his head, a low whine lost in the chaos, but his gaze never left the window, pleading without words. Urgency clawed at her. The storm was merciless, a beast devouring the weak, and he was fading his loyalty, a chain binding him to death's door. She couldn't look away, the sensory assault overwhelming, the metallic tang of rain, the chill seeping through cracks, the dog's silent desperation, a mirror to her own buried storms. Lydia's hand hovered over the doorknob, knuckles white, the rain's roar a cacophony drowning her thoughts. "What are you doing?" Her mind screamed logic, a cold anchor. She was alone for a reason, walls built high after David's departure, the miscarriage's ghost still haunting her steps. Caring meant risk attachment loss, the inevitable shatter when things fell apart. Ghost was astray, wild and broken. What if he bit, ran, or worse, wormed into her heart only to vanish like everything else? Her breath came in shallow bursts, flashlight trembling in her grip, beam dancing over the yard where he huddled, eyes locked on the window like a lifeline. Compassion surged hot and unwelcome, whispering of her own isolation, the emptiness that mirrored his shivering form. "He's dying out there," the voice insisted, but fear countered. "And you'll die inside if you let him in." She paced the foyer, rain lashing the windows like judgments, her internal war raging, empathy versus self-preservation, the pull of his silent plea against the safety of numbness. Then a subtle shift. Ghost lifted his head slightly, his whine piercing the storm, not aggressive, but raw, a vulnerability that echoed her hidden tears. It tipped the scale, compassion winning by a thread, her fear retreating just enough to let her twist the knob. Lydia burst through the door, rain stinging her face like needles, her coat flapping wildly as she stumbled into the yard. The mud sucked at her boots, pulling her down, but she pressed on flashlight beam, jerking erratically over Ghost's huddled form. "Come on," she muttered, voice lost in the gale, extending a trembling hand, wrapped in a sodden blanket. Ghost recoiled at first, body low, a growl rumbling deep in his chest like distant thunder, his eyes flashing wariness honed by betrayal. She slipped, knee hitting the ground with a wet thud, pain shooting up her leg, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she tossed the blanket closer, a messy offering, water pooling around them both. He hesitated, nostrils flaring at her scent, mingled with the storm's fury, then inched forward, limbs stiff as if every step cost him a piece of his guarded soul. Lydia's heart hammered, her free hand clutching the flashlight like a talisman, the beam illuminating his scars raw and glistening. Water dripped from them both in the dim foyer, pooling on the floorboards like evidence of a crime scene, the air thick with the scent of wet fur and earth. Lydia knelt, impulsive now, her hands shaking as she peeled off her coat to drape over Ghost, who stood, rigid eyes darting to every shadow in the unfamiliar space. "You're safe." She whispered the words, feeling foreign on her tongue, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. But irreversible, the door was shut. The storm muted to a distant roar. He didn't move closer, but neither did he flee, his breath coming in ragged huffs that matched her own, a silent acknowledgement of the line crossed. The morning light filtered through the curtains like a hesitant intruder, casting long shadows across the foyer where Ghost had claimed a corner, his body coiled tight as a spring. Lydia moved quietly, pouring coffee with deliberate slowness, her eyes flicking to him without lingering, aware of the invisible barrier between them. He watched, her eyes narrowed to slits, a low growl rumbling in his chest when she stepped too close to the bowl she'd left untouched overnight, his fur bristling like thorns ready to prick. Silence hung heavy, thicker than the steam from her mug, neither initiating contact, her footsteps soft, retreating, his gaze guarded, tracking every motion as if expecting betrayal's shadow to fall. She sat at the table, grading papers with a pen that scratched louder than words, her internal thoughts swirling. "Give him space. Don't push, he's not yours yet." Ghost shifted paws, scraping the floor faintly, but stayed put, his ears pinned back, a sentinel in his own solitude. The house amplified their distance, creaks echoing like unspoken warnings, the air scented with damp fur and unspoken histories. Guarded looks passed like fleeting ghosts, her glance soft with curiosity, his sharp with mistrust, a dance of wariness where neither led. Time stretched minutes into hours, the growl fading to a huff, but the silence persisted, a mutual agreement to observe from afar, building tension in the quiet spaces between. By afternoon, the light had softened, pooling on the floor, like spilled mercy illuminating the gash on Ghost's paw that wept red against his dark fur. Lydia knelt at a distance, a bowl of warm water and cloth, in hand her breath steady but heart-pounding, whispering, "Let me see," though she knew words meant little. He watched from his corner body, tense, a faint whimper escaping as he licked the wound futilely, his pain a silent echo of her own buried aches, the scar from her loss invisible but throbbing. Slowly she approached, cloth extended like an olive branch, and he didn't growl, just stared, eyes mirroring the vulnerability she hid behind routines. The cleaning was gentle water, tinged pink, swirling in the bowl, his flinch a shared confession, her touch light as if handling glass. Later she tore bread into pieces, placing them nearer, not forcing, but offering the scent of yeast filling the air like a tentative truce. Ghost inched forward, nostrils flaring, taking a morsel from the floor, while she sat still, their unspoken wounds aligning, her miscarriage's grief, his abuse's scars in the quiet act. He ate slowly, eyes lifting to hers midway, a flicker of recognition in the pain they both carried, the moment binding them through mirrored suffering. Silent presence, a balm more potent than words. The plate slipped from Lydia's fingers in the dim kitchen light, shattering on the floor with a crack like a bone-snapping shard, scattering like fragmented memories. She knelt to gather them, her breath catching as a sharp edge nicked her palm, a bead of blood blooming red against the white porcelain. Ghost from his corner lifted his head, ears perking not in alarm but curiosity, his body still but eyes intent. The sound echoed in her mind, triggering a flashback. David's voice, angry and distant, a glass hurled against the wall the night he left the crash, marking the end of their shared life. She paused, hand trembling, and noticed a loose wallboard behind the cabinet, pried free by the impact. Inside, tucked in the dust-choked space, lay a small leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and brittle as autumn leaves. Ghost inched closer, nostrils flaring at the faint scent clinging to it. Roses and ink, Clara's essence preserved like a ghost in amber. Lydia opened it carefully, words spilling out in looping script. "He promised forever, but shadows follow us now." Clara had written her love for a man named Elias, woven with fear, hints of jealousy turning violent, a disappearance shrouded in silence. Evening settled over the house like a soft blanket, the air humming with the faint buzz of a moth fluttering against the lampshade, its wings a frantic whisper in the quiet room. Lydia sat in her armchair, the diary open on her lap, words blurring as fatigue tugged at her edges, when Ghost stirred from his spot eyes, locking on the intruder with sudden intensity. He rose, paused, silent on the floor, and pounced clumsily, tail flicking, not wagging yet, but alive with a spark of play. The moth evaded, darting low, and Ghost chased in circles, his limp forgotten in the moment, a soft huff escaping like bottled joy. Lydia watched transfixed, a bubble of laughter rising unbidden from her chest, light unexpected cracking the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. It was the first since David's departure, raw and genuine, warming the room, as if the hearth had ignited on its own. Ghost paused mid-leap, head tilting his tail, giving a tentative wag, once twice the motion, hesitant but real, a sign of walls crumbling. A loose floorboard creaked under Lydia's socked foot as she crossed the living room, the sound sharp and unexpected, like a memory dislodged from its hiding place. She bent to press it down, fingers brushing dust that swirled up like ghosts in the slanting afternoon light, and there, wedged in the gap, was a small silver locket, tarnished but intact, its chain tangled like forgotten promises. Ghost, lounging nearby with his head on his paws, lifted his gaze, nostrils flaring as he caught a whiff of something familiar, roses perhaps, or the faint trace of Clara's perfume embedded in the metal. He rose slowly, limp, barely noticeable now, and nosed closer, not touching but pausing, his breath warm against her hand. The gesture triggered a cascade in Lydia's mind, a flashback to her wedding day, David's fingers clasping a similar locket around her neck, his whisper, "Forever," now a bitter echo in the emptiness left by his leaving. She opened it with trembling fingers, revealing a faded photo, inside not hers, but Clara's, smiling with a man whose face was half-shadowed, eyes full of love turned tragic. Ghost whined softly, a sound like a key turning in a rusty lock, and leaned in his muzzle, brushing the locket ever so gently, as if recognizing the face, his body no longer recoiling but stilling in quiet reverence. The sun dipped low, painting the living room in hues of amber and gold, like a fire kindling in a long, cold hearth, as Lydia rummaged through a box of old toys she'd unpacked for no reason other than to fill the silence. A small rubber ball rolled out, bouncing erratically across the floor with a playful thud, its red surface catching the light like a spark in dry tinder. Ghost's ears perked instantly, his body shifting from its relaxed sprawl, eyes tracking the ball with a curiosity that bordered on wonder, as if it were a relic from a happier life. He inched forward, paw extending tentatively, batting it lightly, the ball skittering away and prompting a soft huff from him, almost a laugh if dogs could. Lydia watched frozen at first, then a chuckle escaped her light, an unbidden bubbling up from a place she'd forgotten existed, the sound warming the air like steam from a kettle. It was the first real laughter since the divorce, raw and freeing, echoing off the walls that had absorbed so much sorrow. Ghost paused, head tilting, then chased the ball with more vigor, tail wagging in earnest, now a rhythmic thump against the rug that synced with her growing mirth. The house transformed subtly, the chill receding shadows softening the scent of pine from outside, mingling with the faint musk of fur, creating a cocoon of unexpected safety. The twilight hour draped the living room in veils of indigo and silver, the kind of light that softened edges and invited secrets to surface like whispers from a half-remembered dream. Lydia sat on the worn couch, the diary closed in her lap, its leather cool against her skin, her fingers idly tracing the embossed cover as if mapping the contours of Clara's lost world. The air held the faint scent of rain-soaked earth from earlier showers, mingling with the musky warmth of Ghost's fur, a presence that had grown from shadow to companion in the quiet days. He lay across the room, body sprawled on the rug like a fallen sentinel, his breathing steady, but eyes half open, always watchful, as if the past's claws still scratched at his peace. Internal thoughts drifted through Lydia's mind like autumn leaves. He's come so far, but there's still a wall invisible, unyielding. She shifted slightly, the couch creaking under her weight, and that's when it happened, unexpected, unbidden, a moment that cracked the air like thunder without sound. The moon hung low, a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, casting elongated shadows through the curtains that danced like specters on the walls. Lydia stirred in her sleep, the diary's revelations weaving into dreams. Clara's face morphing into her own cries, echoing in empty rooms, the weight of unspoken truths pressing like a hand over her mouth. She awoke with a start, heart racing, the room thick with an unnatural stillness. But it was Ghost who signaled first, his body rigid by the window, ears pricked forward like daggers. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not aggressive, but primal, a warning vibrating through the floorboards, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside, where shadows shifted subtly, as if the past had slipped its leash. The air grew heavy, scented with the faint ozone of impending storm, or perhaps something more insidious, echoing the abuse etched in his scars. He paced once, twice, posture alert, hackles rising like frost on glass, then froze, barking sharply at a shadow that flickered across the yard, a shape too human, too familiar. Lydia sat up, internal chill spreading. What's out there? Or is it in here in us? Ghost's instincts foreshadowed the threat, his stillness a harbinger, tension coiling like smoke, the peace fracturing under echoes of trauma resurfacing from the night. A sharp knock echoed through the house like a gunshot in the dead of night, jolting Lydia from her uneasy vigil by the window, her fingers tightening around the diary's spine. Ghost's growl escalated into a snarl, hackles rising like a ridge of ice along his back body, positioning between her and the door, as if shielding a fragile flame from the wind. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see Mr. Pruitt standing there, his face etched with forced casualness, rain dripping from his hat like unshed tears. "Just checking on you, neighbor," he called, voice muffled but insistent, his eyes darting past her when she cracked the door, landing on Ghost, with a flicker of recognition that chilled her blood. The tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over, the house's air thick with the metallic tang of fear and unresolved fury, as Lydia paced the living room, diary clutched like a weapon. Ghost shadowed her, his limp more pronounced now body low, and alert ears twitching at every creak that might herald Pruitt's return. Hours blurred into a restless vigil, but then it came a crash from outside glass, shattering like brittle bones, followed by the rev of an engine too close to aggressive. Lydia rushed to the window, heart slamming to see Pruitt's truck swerving wildly in the street headlights, piercing the night like accusatory eyes, before it veered toward her yard tires, screeching in a loss of control that felt anything but accidental. The door slammed shut behind Pruitt's retreating figure, the echo reverberating through the house like the final gasp of a dying storm, leaving only the patter of rain against the windows and the heavy silence that followed. Lydia slumped against the wall, her body trembling from the adrenaline's cruel ebb tears carving silent paths down her cheeks as regret flooded her. Why had she opened the door, invited the past's venom inside? Ghost stood rigid for a moment, his growl fading into a low whine body, still poised as if the threat lingered in the air's metallic tang. But then he turned eyes, meeting hers in a shared exhaustion that needed no words. Physical separation clawed at them briefly. He retreated to the corner, curling tight tail tucked like a flag of surrender, while she remained by the door. Arms wrapped around herself, the space between them, a chasm widened by the confrontation's raw wound. Internal monologues clashed in the quiet. I almost lost him to Pruitt, to the secrets she thought guilt twisting like a knife, while Ghost's instincts whispered of old abuses, the boot's shadow still looming in his flinch. Dawn crept in like a thief, pale light seeping through the curtains, but the house felt heavier, the air thick with an unspoken menace that prickled Lydia's skin like invisible needles. Ghost stirred first, his ears twitching before she even opened her eyes, body tensing beside her on the couch where they'd collapsed in exhaustion, his low huff a signal that something was amiss. She sat up, heart quickening, scanning the room. Nothing out of place, yet the shadows seemed longer, clinging to corners like reluctant secrets. Outside, the pines rustled unnaturally, not with wind, but a subtle disturbance, leaves whispering as if stalked by an unseen predator. Ghost paced to the window hackles rising in a silent ridge, his gaze fixed on the yard where footprints muddied the frost, faint but deliberate, circling the house like a noose tightening. Internal unease gnawed at Lydia. He's back, Pruitt, or his ghosts watching, waiting. A distant engine idled too far to see, but close enough to hum through the walls, a mechanical growl that set Ghost's tail stiff, his body language a barometer of dread. Paws planted, wide nose flaring at scents carried on the breeze, earthy and foreign, laced with tobacco like Pruitt's cigarettes. The front door rattled under a forceful shove, wood splintering at the edges like brittle ice cracking as Pruitt's silhouette loomed through the frosted glass, his breath fogging it in ragged bursts. "Open up, or I'll make you," he bellowed, voice raw with desperation. The threat no longer veiled, but explicit, a hammer poised to strike. Lydia backed away, heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird, the diary clutched to her chest as if it were a shield. But Pruitt kicked again, the lock giving way with a metallic snap, the door swinging open to reveal him, eyes wild, a flashlight in one hand, glinting like a blade, the other clenched in a fist that promised violence. Ghost snarled, positioning himself between them. But Pruitt advanced. That dog's the last witness, should have finished it years ago. His confession spilling like poison, admitting to Clara's end, Elias's murder buried under his lies. The confrontation was visceral air, thick with sweat and fear. Pruitt lunging for the diary, his hand grazing Lydia's arm, bruising it instantly. Time slowed to a viscous crawl, the knife in Pruitt's hand, hovering like a judgment, suspended its blade, reflecting the terror in Lydia's eyes as she pressed against the wall, the scattered diary pages, whispering Clara's truths at her feet. Internal turmoil raged. Run, fight. Save him or myself. But Ghost's labored whine cut through his body, trembling yet defiant eyes locking onto hers with a plea that transcended words, mirroring their bonded arcs of healing, now teetering on oblivion. The choice crystallized raw and irreversible. Lydia lunged not away but forward, grabbing a nearby lamp, its cord yanking free as she swung it with all her might, the base connecting with Pruitt's arm in a crack of bone and glass, the knife clattering to the floor. "No more," she screamed. voice breaking the silence like thunder committing to protection, her action transforming the tension into a whirlwind of resolution. The vet's office hummed with the sterile, quiet fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over the examination room, where Ghost lay on the cold steel table, his body limp under the weight of sedatives, breaths rising and falling in shallow waves. Lydia sat beside him, her chair creaking faintly as she shifted hands folded in her lap. The chaos of the night before lingering like fog in her mind, sirens fading into distance. Pruitt's handcuffed form vanishing into the patrol car, leaving only this hollow space. The vet moved with deliberate slowness, gloved fingers probing the gash on Ghost's side, cleaning it with swabs soaked in antiseptic, the sharp scent stinging the air, mingling with the faint copper of blood. Stitches pulled taut black thread weaving through fur-matted skin, each tug a soft punctuation in the otherwise endless pause. Lydia's eyes tracing the rise and fall of his chest, her own breath sinking unconsciously as if to will him through the void. Emotional emptiness stretched between them, vast and echoing. The adrenaline's crash, leaving her numb thoughts drifting in long, meandering streams. Clara's diary now in police hands, truths unearthed. But at what cost? The house waiting empty, its secrets aired, yet shadows persisting. Ghost stirred slightly, a whimper escaping like a sigh from deep within his eyes, cracking open to meet hers, briefly dull with pain but holding a flicker of recognition before closing again, the moment hanging suspended. She reached out tentatively, fingers brushing his paw, minimal contact in the vast quiet, the vet murmuring assurances, he'll heal but give him time. Words that floated unattached as Lydia nodded her movements, minimal body heavy with survival's toll. The room's clock ticked lazily, marking time's slow crawl bandages, wrapping around his flank in white layers soft and final, sealing the wound, but not the ache within. Outside, dawn broke in muted grays, the world decompressing alongside them, fragile safety returning like breath after drowning, yet the void lingered, a quiet expanse where words failed, only presence remaining. Back in the house, days blurred into a steady rhythm of recovery. The air softened by sunlight filtering through curtains carrying the scent of pine and fresh bandages, as Lydia and Ghost navigated their shared mending with interwoven threads of behavior and emotion. She moved with a deliberate tempo, setting down a bowl of water laced with broth, her eyes meeting his across the room, deep brown pools reflecting her own weariness, holding contact for seconds that stretched like taffy, a silent conversation where trust reaffirmed itself in the unwavering gaze. Ghost lifted his head slowly, tail thumping once against the rug, a small gesture that rippled through the space, his fur catching the light in soft waves while she knelt nearby, not touching yet the proximity, a sensory bridge, the warmth of his breath on her hand, the faint whisker twitch as he sniffed her fingers. Over time, these acts repeated, building like layers of sediment, her pouring kibble into his dish, the clink of metal echoing softly, him eating with measured bites, pausing to look up, eyes locking again, conveying gratitude without sound, emotions weaving through the steady cadence of their days. The pines stood sentinel under a sky washed clean by rain, their needles glistening like emeralds in the soft morning light as Lydia and Ghost stepped out together, the door clicking shut behind them with a finality that echoed rebirth. Her hand brushed his fur, lightly fingers, lingering on the healed scar along his flank, a touch intimate as breath shared in sleep, while he leaned into her leg stride, matching hers in unhurried sink paws and boots crunching leaves in harmonious rhythm. No leash bound them, only the invisible thread of trust, his eyes lifting to hers, occasionally soulful and clear, free of the window's haunting fixation, a gaze that released the past's grip like a sigh exhaled after years held tight. The path wound through the woods, air crisp with earth and pine, each step a motion of quiet release, her shoulders straightening his tail, swaying gently, breaths mingling in visible puffs that danced and dissipated. At a clearing, Ghost paused, head turning toward the house in the distance, then rested it against her thigh, a single unexpected act symbolizing total surrender. His warmth seeping through fabric, evoking tears she let fall freely now, emotional catharsis washing over like dawn's first rays. The gesture marked the end of fear, intimate focus on their shared motion, hands steady, eyes, soft breaths deep, A rebirth, not in grand declarations, but in this walking side by side, the world remade in their quiet unity, shadows lingering faint but overpowered by light.